so that I open my eyes. Early this morning, stretching and yawning, preparing for the daily. Challenges will surely arise, but I won't sweat them. I just tackle them all one at a time and then forget them, cause I'm focused on what's happening next. Won't let them hold me, cause time is of the essence, and my life's my one and only. I'ma ride it till the tires burn off, grinding metal on the asphalt, sparks in the road, foot on the pedal, both hands upon the steering wheel, stay on the road. So when I'm old, I can reflect on what I've learned through the struggle, how these hard times have taught me well, enlighten my spirit and showed an alley cat to survive in the jungle. It ain't easy, I keep my nose on the grind and maintain a level consciousness of the mind. You won't hear me complain, cause bro, I don't have the time. I tell ya, long as I'm breathing, everything's fine.
You got a roof over your head at night, then you're doing alright. Alright. You doing what you wanna do with your life, then you doing alright. Alright. You really know what you need to survive, then you doing alright. Alright. You keep your hope and your dreams alive, then you doing alright. Right on to the real rhyme representation that might never make it to regular repetitive stations, but all the true DJs give it heavy rotation. Repping it from the place that I was born and raised in ATLGA, we stay in the cut. Like my man Creation, lay in the cuts. Sit back and listen, you've been saying too much. Let the beat ride, feel the heat rise. Let my feet glide over the concrete. I got my headphones on and nothing can harm me. I'm feeling the melody and I'm singing the harmony. The rhythm comes into me but forever beyond me. Eternally calm.
Welcome, everybody. Great to see so many familiar faces showing up. Welcome to part 2 of FCYO's 20th anniversary celebration. My name is Eric Braxton. I'm the co-executive director of FCYO, and I'm here with my co-executive director, Monica Cordova, and we will be your hosts for today.
Hi, everybody. We took a few minutes to let everybody get on, so that's why we extended the song time, because we know there was some mishaps with the link. So hopefully more folks will be joining as we go. We're so excited to be here with you all. And Eric, I see you have brought back the orange suit. I'm really, really, really glad that you wore it again for the second time. We're still gonna wait for you to wear it in person, but lovely to see the orange suit make an appearance again.
You know, I don't know how many more chances I got to wear it, and I have kept the tags on it, so we'll see how it goes.
Of course you have, of course you have. So today, we just wanna provide some opportunities to continue to connect and build with you all. You know, for many of you know, because you've heard us say multiple times that FCYO turned 20 in 2020. And probably back in 2018, we began this ambitious plan to celebrate our 20th in 2020 in all of the big ways, with a new field scan, opportunities to share stories of organizers and those at the creation of FCYO. And then 2020 happened. And so we've extended our birthday into 2021. Many of you were with us for our December celebration. And we're glad to continue to have the opportunity to look back at the last 20 years of youth organizing with you and talk a little bit more about what the future holds for us in this panel session today. We'd love for you all to join us. The chat has been a beautiful place for folks to engage. So please drop your name, your pronouns, your organizations, and share a success story of young people in social movements over the last 20 years. It could be an experience that you were directly involved in or something that inspired you. But we'd love to continue to hear from you throughout the day through the chat box. So again, please name, pronouns, organization, and a success story of young people in social movements over the last 20 years.
So as Monica was saying, as you're doing that, you know, our goal for today is to look back at the last 20 years of youth organizing, to celebrate what's been accomplished, and to pull out the key lessons. We also want to hear from young people and organizers about their vision for the role of young people in social movements as we go forward. I think, as many folks know, that part of FCYO's special sauce has always been to bring funders and youth organizers together to learn and strategize. And so we hope to continue to act in that spirit here. I know we're not in person, but we want to try to make this as interactive and engaging as possible. So please use the chat. We also have some small groups that we'll be doing towards the end, and we hope you'll really get to engage with each other there. So we have a really exciting session planned now. We're gonna start with a video that we've put together about the last 20 years of youth organizing. Monica and I are going to share some of our lessons and assessments about where youth organizing has been and where it's going. We're going to hear from youth leaders about their vision for the future. We've got an amazing conversation with some great youth organizing leaders about their lessons and where they see things going. And then we're going to have some good small groups where we'll have a chance to really get in and engage with each other. So we hope that you will sit back and enjoy, but not sit back too much. Engage with each other, talk, and be part of the conversation, because you know that's how we like to do things here.
So up next, we do have a video. It was actually in the works all of last year. We were excited to be able to, through a multitude of avenues, document the 20 years of youth organizing and the strides it's made and the growth of the field. So we're going to be showing a video. Thank you so much to all the folks that took the time to interview and talk with us to prepare this video. We hope that it'll give us all a beautiful opportunity to collectively understand youth organizing, but also reminisce a little bit. So please enjoy.
I started out doing youth development work. I was literally like Mr. AmeriCorps Vista, helping do service projects, do service learning. And I really honestly believe that that was the methodology to engage Black and other young folks of color in their communities to make systemic change. I kept trying to, in my little after school program with my snacks and stuff, trying to get them to organize this service project because they need to get their hours to graduate. And they just flat out refused. They would be like, you know, community service, that's stuff you do when you've committed a crime. We then kind of used service learning as a methodology to introduce community organizing. We went and found this group that was youth organizing around environmental justice. They did the kind of political education, involved them basically what was then a series of direct actions. Just the level of engagement, kind of all the things that I had imagined that service would do for Black youth and other young people, it was happening through youth organizing.
Youth organizing is the entrance, is the first, the first love of what you believe is possible in this world. It's the first moment when you find finally your voice and you discover who you are. That is the beauty of youth organizing, and that you have nothing to lose but your chains.
You know, in the late 90s, there was this tremendous growth in youth organizing across the country. I mean, young people have always been involved in social justice movements. That wasn't new. But there was a way in the late 90s that a group of organizations formed that were particularly organizing young people against public policy attacks on young people of color. You know, the idea of young people as super predators. And so there were a set of funders that came together and said, this is really important. How do we help this gain traction in philanthropy and get more resources to this work? And how do we help build a strong, stable field that connects these organizations to each other?
We had to fight in the early years of the Funders Collaborative to even get young people recognized as potential leaders in social justice work, right? They were always the afterthought. And so I remember, you know, talking in the beginnings with Vera, saying that what we are trying to achieve is to move youth organizing into the center of the social justice movement, such that young people are seen as essential leaders within this movement.
I think the focus in those early years of the collaborative is, what is this, you know, and this is obviously like funder speak, what is this new field that was emerging? And what are the best ways that funders know how to resource a new field and to get their colleagues in other institutions to jump on board as well? So that really broke down into grant making, capacity building work, and intellectual capital development. And the whole time building this community within the collaborative itself, right? That was really engaged in a lot of the knowledge development around the work.
It was a new time in youth organizing. It felt like we were really trying to find each other. At the time, kind of youth organizing was not accepted as a legitimate form of youth development, nor was it accepted as a legitimate form of community organizing, in spite of its radical history and place in the civil rights movement. And so FCYO at that time was a really powerful force in helping to capture and document what was an emergent strategy in the United States.
The first year that I was at the Funders Collaborative on staff, we organized the first ever kind of national youth organizing conference. There was anywhere between 75 to 100 youth leaders and staff that came to that meeting from all over the country. There was opportunity to just like build and connect across place, which was part of, I feel like, a kind of collective experience of understanding that, oh, this work is happening everywhere.
At that point, a lot of those organizations didn't know that anybody else was doing this and didn't know that there were other practices, right? And so it was really powerful for me as a young youth organizer to come together with others and talk about how do you do leadership development? How do you organize your campaigns? And actually creating that connective tissue between organizations that like every strong field needs.
People didn't even talk about youth organizing. They were talking about kids at risk. It was usually the executive directors or the people that convened youth was white people. And they fell in love about immigration and they want to do the good things for the community. We were told in a moment of our time as a young people, you are the good immigrants. You are is not fault of your fault, it's your parents. But that was bullshit. It was already a framework, a narrative given by not directed, impacted adults that were saying, I think this is the best look for you. And I believe in 2012, when we were able to challenge even the Obama administration, we were able to challenge what it was saying, it was the common narrative. It was when we started reclaiming our story, reclaiming who we are. And today we are so proud to say we are undocumented, unafraid, unapologetic. We can tell and say, abolish ICE, abolish CBP, abolish police.
Young people and youth organizing groups have really shifted the common sense. One of the best examples of that is around school discipline. You know, in the early 2000s, we had the idea of zero tolerance. They were putting more metal detectors, school police forces were growing, and everything was about how do we use punishment to deal with school discipline. And I think a lot of youth organizing groups have stepped up and organized campaigns to fundamentally shift the logic on school discipline from one of zero tolerance to one of restorative practices and supports, and how do we create school climates that are truly supportive to young people.
I think one of the biggest roles in youth organizing is young people's role and position in shifting relationships, shifting narratives and institutions along with adults, and be able to play the vanguard and the bridge, whether it be across generations, across communities.
Young people in particular play a unique role in mobilizing whole families, whole communities. They often are the ones that are bringing the information back that they're gathering from what they're learning in their organizations to sit at the kitchen table and have a conversation with their mom and dad about why voting is important.
What I believe the role of young people are in organizing and building social movements is to change the hearts and minds and move the needle of where the country believes it's possible. Us young people are like imagining a whole new world that doesn't exist yet. And part of the reason why we are able to imagine this new world is because our ancestors have imagined a world that we are living in now that is way further than they could see. And so it's our job to continue to push the fire and the flame to keep reimagining what America can be for us.
We don't get it! Shut it down! We don't get it! Shut it down! We don't get it! Shut it down!
I feel like we're at this place where there's critical mass of movement energy right now coming out of both the pressure points of coronavirus experience of the last 8 months, layered on with the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many others, and the resistance that's come out of that space built on previous resistance.
Sometimes change happens over decades, and then sometimes a decade's worth of change happens all at once. And this is the moment where a decade's worth of change is happening all at once. And part of the catalyst of that is the sort of energy and momentum that youth organizing has done to shape the conversation in this moment. It's not that our country is just now trying to reckon with does Black Lives Matter. It's that young people stood up in the streets and made it very clear that we are not going away until we answer and figure out how do we move forward in this question. That's what shaped it. That's what kept the sort of, the sort of drumbeat throughout the summer to the point where like no one can look away.
So we're in a very strong place relative to the understanding, exposure, and positioning of youth organizers, again, being central to social justice movements right now. Going forward, hopefully what we're seeing and what organizations like the Funders Collaborative for Youth Organizing have helped to build in a philanthropic sector over time is the normalization of and a recognition that we cannot achieve the goals of a thriving community, the goals of a progressive agenda, without having the leadership of young people at the center of that.
Most of the change that we seek in the world is going to take more than our lifetime to achieve it. And so you are going to need young people who are going to be willing to carry it forward. And that is the hope and the promise of young people and what they bring to movements.
There's so much opportunity for the ways in which youth organizing can continue to what we call an FCYO level up. If we take the historic arc of the last 20 years and see the growth of organizations from fighting for more textbooks in schools to now in Oakland passing a measure to get 16-year-olds the right to vote on school board elections. The possibilities are quite limitless, but what is necessary is for them to have the level of resource and capacities to build the types of movements they need.
The most intentional transformation that youth organizing has brought is that has been able to evolve, adapt, and transform in a way from activism to grassroots organizations to really develop a strategy of building-based, electoral, and political strategy that includes field, advocacy, public narrative. All that is an evolution of how youth organizing has become the center of innovation, but at the same time creating a space for intersectionality and creating a space for intergenerational strategy. Today, you see in the table creating a strategy a lot of young people of color. Younger and younger, you see them holding a space, but also positions of decision making. And they're building up the power needed for our community.
I think it's, really exciting to also see the ways in which youth organizing continues to experiment with power building in conjunction with deep compassionate care, ways in which young people are experimenting with alternatives to state-sanctioned violence, ways in which folks are exploring and organizing their peers to create their own data, their own findings, identify priorities that really speak to the needs of their peers.
We're in such a strange time. I think that 2020 has been such a year of wild destruction and wild creation. And I hope very much that youth organizing as a field and as a sector plays a meaningful role in providing the leadership and feeding the next generations of leaders into the center of the conversation about what is this world that we live in? What is the world that we're building in the aftermath of this destruction?
In an era where we can't physically be in physical presence with one another, what has reigned true, and I think is where we need to go next, is that the power and strength of a relationship is what's going to help us endure. How can we go deeper in our relationships to leverage the power we need to win?
If you think about the most pressing issues of this moment, whether it be climate change or defund the police or the work that Dreamers have led for a decade plus, young people are at the center of it. I think the role of philanthropy in that is to understand their strategic role in both being good allies and strategic partners, moving the resources to see themselves as collaborators in this work.
I think if philanthropy is thinking more long-term, then youth organizing is one of the most foundational things it can invest in, because you're also investing in young people who are going to be in that struggle for the rest of their life, every step of the way, and aren't just going to leave after there's a 3 to 5 year grant or a 3 to 5 year campaign when something ends.
Foundations need to seriously rethink their emphasis on outcomes evaluation and the idea that you can measure the impact of your work for freedom and liberation within the course of a year, 2 years, 3 years, and then base their funding on that. Movement work is about the generations ahead. Movement work is about, building the infrastructure for a moment you cannot predict, you cannot control. And therefore, the idea of quantitative outcomes assessments and evaluations, I think, should be disbanded within foundations. It is a capitalist, sort of model, and it drives poor funding models and decisions. So, on a basic level, from a movement perspective out of faith, give organizations large general support dollars for many years, even if it looks like they are quote unquote failing. Because what fails in 1 year might succeed in 5. What fails in 1 year might lay the seeds for something in 20. And if we are in this for transformation, then that's the model and the frame and the time scale should be operating off of.
I see youth organizing as in this phase of leveling up to truly lead the nation and build the kind of power that can actually take on systemic racism, climate change, and the kind of problems that we face in this moment. And what that means is asking some deep questions about what does it really mean to build the kind of power that we need to address those issues. And I see youth organizers across the country doing that.
I think this is the most genuine and the genius part of FCYO, that you bring organizers to really run the strategy of this intermediary funder, to organize funder and organize the field, right? And to really address what has been systematic racism, disfranchising young people to have voice, young people to be part of the strategy, to young people to say, I deserve that you invest in me. I deserve because I am a leader of my community. I'm part of the community, right? So all that is for me what is the story of FCYO personally, and the story how I more holistically understand It's a disruptor of a status quo. It's the creation of uplifting the voice of young people and the genius of it, the innovation of it, and also really creating badass organizers and organizations to win.
All right, thank you, everybody. Great to see so many of your faces in that video. Thanks to everybody that helped contribute to making it happen. So we want to now share some of our reflections from FCYO about the last 20 years of youth organizing and what we think is needed now. We know that young people have always been at the forefront of social movements. But as we said in the video, in the 90s, a new form of youth organizing spread across the country. Young people were responding to public policy attacks, criminalizing young people of color. And there were also a set of youth workers recognizing that giving young people a voice was not enough. And so FCYO started in 2000 when a group of funders came together to see how they could help get more resources for this work and build a stronger field. And since that time, a lot has been accomplished. First, our current field scan, which we'll be releasing in a few months, has identified 312 youth organizing groups from across the country. And we know there's a lot more. In addition, youth organizing groups have led campaigns that have resulted in really meaningful wins for their communities. I often say that when I started in youth organizing, we were fighting for textbooks and cleaner bathrooms. And now youth organizers are advancing city and state policies that are at a whole nother scale. School discipline and immigrant rights are just two issues where young people have won campaigns across the country that have benefited whole communities and really changed the common sense of how we look at those issues. And in addition, if we look at some of the big social movements of the last decade, the movement for Black lives, climate justice, more, it's young people who are at the forefront. Another thing is that youth organizing groups have dramatically increased their use of voter engagement over the last couple of years. 20 years ago, there were really only a few youth organizing groups that were doing a lot of voter engagement. And now we see that the majority of groups have really incorporated some kind of voter engagement with their issue organizing and leadership development. And many of those groups have developed highly sophisticated voter programs that are helping to make young people of color a critical voter bloc and often the decisive difference in elections. And they aren't just turning out the youth vote. In a lot of places, young people are organizing whole communities to vote and really are the key catalyst in building intergenerational community power. Another key accomplishment is that youth organizing groups have increased their ability to support young people as whole people. Long ago, youth organizers realized that young people in their programs are suffering from the same systems of oppression that they're organizing to address. Youth organizing groups have been on the forefront of a model of organizing that builds power and also supports individual transformational healing, one that recognizes that individual transformation and systemic change must go hand in hand. And so the result is that many studies now recognize that youth organizing is in fact one of the best ways to support young people's holistic development. And in addition, there's a lot of key leaders in movements, communities, workplaces, elected officials that got their start in youth organizing. So a lot has been accomplished, but also as we talk to youth organizers across the country, we want to be real about the challenges that we hear that they're facing. First, we hear over and over again about the challenges of organizing and supporting young people's needs with limited resources. Second, while youth organizing groups are training thousands of young leaders, there's still way too many young people that are not finding their way to being able to stay in this work after they transition to adulthood. There are some serious gaps in our leadership pipeline, and that's a challenge not just for youth organizing groups, but for the social justice movement overall. And then finally, we hear many groups saying that they have won policy changes and mobilized young people, but that they're hitting a wall. And groups describe that differently. Some say, well, we've won policy changes, but the implementation ends up being hollow. Others say, well, we can win things when we have a friendly administration, but we have a hard time moving oppositional decision makers. Others notice that while they're winning policies, the actual conditions in their communities are getting worse. And so what all of these things have in common is the recognition that truly addressing the big challenges that we face today will require a new level of power. And overall, what we're seeing is a youth organizing field that's come a long way and is now grappling with what will it really take to play a leading role in advancing a truly just and equitable world? And that's what we really need. So with that, I will turn it over to Monica to talk about what we are seeing going forward.
Thanks, Eric. I don't think I need to tell this crew of folks that we're living through a pivotal moment, and young people from oppressed communities have a decisive role to play in our struggle for liberation. We all watched as just last week, we witnessed violent white supremacists storm the Capitol, and we continue to be amid unprecedented threats to our democracy. Not to mention the growing global pandemic, entrenched systemic racial and gender oppression, and growing wealth inequality. This multidimensional crisis leaves us at a choice point. Our society can either move towards greater fear and repression or greater equality and justice. But for us to move towards justice, we must recognize Black, Indigenous youth, working class young people, young women, and queer and trans youth have a critical role to play in building the movements we need. In doing so, we must be clear this will require a new level of coordination, strategy, and power. We've got to level up, not only in our organizing methodology, but in our funding strategies. First, to win liberation, we must achieve the power to transform economic and social conditions for our communities and society as a whole. To do this, our organizing must build base at significant scale, develop broad-based strategic alliances, and elevate public narratives that promote our vision for social justice and true democracy. In actualizing the power to win, it's important to recognize the difference between community empowerment and wielding the power necessary to fundamentally reimagine and rebuild our nation. Youth organizing campaigns will need to engage young people on issues directly impacting them, while also developing their political consciousness and skills to be lifelong organizers and activists. We'll need young leaders who can ground their struggle within a broader ideology and vision for social transformation. But young people can't do it alone. We also need intergenerational infrastructure that leads to political life beyond youth organizing. Youth organizing should be the first step in a life of movement work. It will be vital to create pathways for them to continue engaging in political struggle into adulthood. And for those of us in philanthropy, we got to step up too and act as true strategic partners and co-conspirators. If we need organizing at scale, we must also have fund at scale. So does that So what does that mean for FCYO? Over the last year, we have been working with funders and youth organizers from across the country to experiment with what it will take to build a more powerful, strategic, and aligned youth organizing field with the capacities to address the challenges of this moment. We'll be launching a new set of programs and funding campaigns to ensure that this generation of young people has the resources, tools needed to build the power to win. And this process will be grounded in our 3 goals. First, we want to expand resources. We'll expand our grant making and provide a significant boost in resources to young people advancing racial, economic, and gender justice, and invest in those that have assembled a powerful new voting bloc and are driving real change in education, policing, mass incarceration, health, immigration, climate change, and more. We also want to support groups in building the power to win. With multiple entry points and a structured ladder of engagement, our strategic grant making will create opportunities to connect with a wider range of organizations while also developing a core of groups that can initiate a new level of coordination and strategy. Our ultimate goal is to develop a robust youth organizing ecosystem in which groups share a common long-term strategic orientation and interdependent programming while operating at different scales with diverse constituencies. And we also know that transformative change requires impactful leaders with the strategy, skills, and resiliency to lead powerful movements. While most of our work has focused on supporting strong organizations, there is also a need to support camaraderie, strategic thinking, and the restorative healing of individual leaders within our network. To that end, we'll launch a new program to support the development of young movement leaders. There's a lot ahead for FCYO and for the field in this next year and into the next 20 years. And we really hope that we can count on all of you to be allies, partners, collaborators, conspirators, in continuing to elevate the role of young people in social change.
All right. Thank you, Monica. So what we wanted to do next is we want to make sure today that we're hearing from young people about their vision for this work. And so now I want to introduce Ixchel Arista. Ixchel is a 16-year-old youth organizer with Oakland's Kids First and a student at Oakland High School. She's raised in a biracial household and has been working for the past year and a half to pass Measure QQ in an effort to enfranchise and build power for Oakland youth. So Ixchel, can you talk to us a little bit about what you have accomplished and what you think is needed to advance the role of young people in movements for social justice now?
Yeah. Before joining the Youth Organizing Council at Oakland Kids First, I had never been as involved in organizing towards social change. I had participated in direct actions like protests and learned about different social justice issues and movements, but I was not the one leading the organizing or starting a movement for issues that were directly impacting me. When I joined a community of passionate students from other Oakland public schools that shared similar experiences, I was presented with this opportunity to make positive changes that would impact generations to come. Despite being relatively new to organizing, there's a lot that I'm proud of. First and foremost, I'm proud of all the skills that I've developed throughout this campaign, whether it be public speaking, interacting with adults virtually and in person, building relationships, or persuading others to support causes I'm passionate about. Being a part of this campaign has definitely assisted my growth, specifically when it comes to communicating with a wide range of audiences. I've become more civically engaged and knowledgeable. Before last year, I didn't know the first thing about running a campaign, developing a measure, the process to get it on the ballot, and getting enough support to get it passed. And now these are all skills that I will have with me to apply to future causes. And I wouldn't have gained them and strengthened them if I wasn't involved in organizing. I also got to learn and identify the 3 faces of power through the Oakland You Vote campaign for the first time. Initially, we decided that we wanted to institute change by working to expand voting rights to 16, 17-year-olds in school board elections. And an important strategy to make this happen was to hold meetings with city council members in order to build relationships with them. Our goal in meeting with these city council members was to ask them to support and champion the Oakland Youth Vote, engage in a power map activity to identify our allies and our opposition in positions of power, and determine who would be a strategic ally versus a tactical ally. We built and solidified a team, a coalition made up of other youth-serving organizations, not only with a common goal, but shared values and a shared vision. Furthermore, our issue expertise was tested when building a base of supporters, many who had the perception that young people were not ready to vote. We were put in a position where we needed to win a battle of ideas. We executed weekly phone banks leading up to the election. Our strategy was to have meaningful one-on-one conversations with Oakland voters and challenge adultist narratives. I heard things like, young people don't care about voting rights, or young people aren't capable of making these types of decisions, which we've proven wrong through our drive, ability, and leadership to demand and win social change. Our moral power has historically not been enough, and this campaign has been years in the making. There were times where I felt personally challenged when I wasn't sure if my knowledge would shine through during phone banking or interviews. Sorry. But my peers and adults always reminded me that I am the expert of my own experience, and that in my heart, I know why and what I'm fighting for. Lastly, I adopted a new definition of power itself, what it is, what it means to have it, the ability to control the conditions that impact me, my education, and my community. That's the end game for the organizing I've done, is to transform moral power into social power and to redistribute it to those who have been disenfranchised, unheard, and overlooked for too long. In the future, I imagine a world where young people from all walks of life come together to work collectively towards climate justice, racial justice, which includes equitable access to high-quality education and health services, completely abolishing punitive policing practices and redirecting police funding to mental health services and other alternatives. Economic justice, making sure everyone has access to jobs that pay a living wage, taxing the rich what they owe us, and redistributing capital in an equitable manner. I envision immigration reform, opening pathways for immigrants and asylum seekers to become contributing and thriving members of society. I foresee a world where we bring housing justice into our most gentrified and affected communities, as well as fighting to abolish the prison industrial complex and assuring all of the innocent Black and Brown people are supported when being reintegrated into their communities. More locally and immediately, I will continue to work so that my peers and I see Oakland Youth Vote successfully implemented with a task force made up of students, educators, school board members, city council, and the registrar's office to determine logistics such as polling places, the pre-registration of young voters, and the development of special ballots. We will have to spearhead voter education and curriculum development, classroom presentations, focus groups, etc., in efforts to mobilize educated young voters. We'll have to coordinate efforts to register and pre-register thousands of youth students across Oakland schools to identify and lift core values impacting or core issues impacting Oakland students and develop non-negotiable demands for OUSD and hold school board directors accountable to our priorities during and beyond elections. I want to see my peers actually vote. I want to see my school and all Oakland high schools actually cut out time to educate students about their right to vote and why they should care to begin with. I feel like most students don't realize that they have the potential and now some actual social power to make the change they want to see. Just like I once didn't realize that I could help put a measure on the ballot and make it law. Young people have been at the forefront of movements and campaigns for gun control and reform, climate strikes, Black Lives Matter protests, and demanding equitable education for all. Getting Oakland Youth Vote passed is not just a win that will impact our generation. We are laying down the groundwork to grant power to students for generations to come and create a more accessible on-ramp to participating in this country's fragile democracy.
I mean, I don't much, y'all, but like, I just feel like I got schooled. So, Ixchel, thank you so much for all of the wisdom you just dropped. Deep, deep gratitude. Yes, please keep giving shout outs in the chat. That was like dope. So thank you. To keep things moving, we also have a phenomenal panel discussion up next. We are just unbelievably honored to have 3 incredible movement leaders with us today to share insights and lessons in youth organizing over the last 20 years and their vision for the work moving forward. So today we have with us Luis Sanchez. Over the last 25 years, Luis has dedicated himself to building a movement for educational, social, and economic justice in California. Prior to joining Power California, Luis was a senior fellow at the Movement Strategy Center. In that capacity, he led the Boys and Men of Color work and the Building Healthy Communities statewide youth engagement initiative with the California Endowment. We also have with us James Lopez. James is the executive director of Power U Center for Social Change in Miami, Florida. From Rochester, New York, James was politicized by the tragedies of Trayvon, Mike Brown, and the movement for Black Lives. James has seen firsthand in movements the need for not only long-term strategy, but the need to develop robust infrastructure to be able to position working class youth to help build the organizations needed to win. And also with us today is Cristina Jimenez. Cristina is a community organizer, strategist, storyteller, and freedom fighter. She is co-founder and former executive director of United We Dream, the largest immigrant youth-led organization in the country. Cristina's leadership has grown it into a powerful organization of over 800,000 members and has played a pivotal role in shifting politics and narrative about immigrants and immigration, ultimately influencing policy. Cristina was instrumental in United We Dream's successful campaign to get President Obama to sign Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA, into law. In recognition of her social justice organizing, Cristina received the 2017 MacArthur Fellowship, the 4 Freedoms Award, and a spot on 2018's Time 100 list. So everybody, please join me in giving a warm welcome to these 3 phenomenal movement leaders. We first thought it would be a really great opportunity to hear a little bit from each of them. So we've asked each of them just to share a story from their experience in youth organizing over the last 20 years and any insights or lessons learned. And so we're gonna actually start with Cristina, who is gonna tell us a little bit about her work over the last, decade, right? So Cristina.
Thank you, Monica. And thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. I am so grateful to be in community, and congratulations to all of the work of the collaborative. Much of the organizing that we just reviewed in your video, which was amazing, could not have happened without the organizing that you led in the field and in supporting the development and the infrastructure of this field. So it's a true honor to be with all of you and celebrating your work. I'll just start with a few things that I think is important to lift up as we think about not only the lessons, but also where we want to go and where we need to go as a country and as a field to organize young people and to support youth-led movements. I grew up undocumented in New York City, and as a teenager, the undocumented experience, living in fear of being caught by ICE, detained, separated from my family, or put in deportation proceedings, was always haunting my family and I. And if it had not been for organizing, I truly don't know what would have happened with my life. At the age of 14, I was already living through the implications of what it meant to be undocumented with my family when my dad experienced multiple times that his wages were stolen. But being undocumented, we lived in fear that if we say something could happen to us and we can be deported from the country and separated from our families. But after 9/11, things changed very drastically for many of us who remember that moment. In New York City in particular, We saw an increase of criminalization of Muslim immigrants, of all immigrants of color, and that the changing policies, the creation of the Department of Homeland Security led to many of people in our communities to be not only targeted, but arrested and deported and separated from their families. And I was really close to losing one of my close friends at the time, Walter Barrientos, who's now my life partner, and we met through organizing and movement building. He was arrested and put in deportation by Border Patrol. And it was that experience of being at a moment of losing a loved one to deportation that for me was a turning point in making me feel a strong commitment to ensure that no human being, that no immigrant had to go through the experience of feeling racially profiled, targeted, of living in fear, and be put in deportation and potentially separated from your family members. And that turning point led me to meet other young people who were going through the same experience in the early 2000s. And we created a safe space, not only for us to be able to share our stories, but also to support each other and what it meant to be undocumented, from figuring out how to get jobs, how to fight deportations, but also how you date when you are undocumented, and sharing all the tips around that. And I share that those spaces are so important because this is where I was able to shed my fear and my shame of being undocumented by building in solidarity with others that were living the same experience that I did. And that personal transformation of being able to shed the fear, but also get training on organizing, led me to really find my voice, but to also learn the tools for how to fight for justice, for my life, for my family, and for our communities. And I want to lift up that the experience of building spaces of transformation and of liberation for young people are so critical for us to be able to radically love ourselves and dismantle the lies that society and that white supremacy tell many people in our communities of color, that we don't belong, that we are not worthy. But that is not enough. After we go through that process of transformation and building community and building empowerment, it became really clear that for us, we needed to build power. I remember sharing my story with members of Congress, with media, with reporters for many years. Coming out as undocumented and unafraid was a pivotal point for me and for our movement. But we were not changing all of the things that we needed to change systematically by only sharing our stories. So sharing our stories wasn't enough. It was important to disrupt the debate, to disrupt the conversation, to humanize how the media and politicians were talking about immigrant lives. But it wasn't enough to create the kind of change that we needed to see in the system, in the policy, and the politics of the conversation. So it was because young, undocumented people living through that experience, coming together and organizing and building community, but also realizing that we needed to build power to create change, that have led to victories like DACA, to stopping thousands of deportations, and to create a different conversation about immigrants and immigration in this country. We've really disrupted the way that we're talking about our communities. But it could not have been done if we had not centered the leadership of people impacted by the injustice. So one of the things that I have learned in my work is that those closest to the pain are closest to the solution. And that is the case in any community organizing that we do, and certainly in youth organizing. The last thing that I'll share is that when we realized that, we, by sharing our stories, we were moving the conversation, but we were not really creating the kind of change that we needed to see and getting the votes or the policies that we needed to see in Congress or at the state level. We really focus on building not only a narrative, but building power around those narratives. And when we say power at United We Dream and in the immigrant youth movement, we meant building a robust base of people directly impacted. That led United We Dream to move from a couple of hundred people impacted that were part of our spaces to now having close to 1 million members that are organized within United We Dream, and thousands that are organized at the local level through many of the affiliates of United We Dream. from the Southwest to the East Coast. Many of the groups that I see many of the leaders here, whether that is Connecticut Students for a Dream or New Mexico Dream Team or Dream Action Oklahoma. Those are the members that have made our movement really powerful because we have built that people power to force politicians, not only with the moral imperative to make a choice around the policies that we need, but ultimately to create the conditions that they must meet our demands. And that is not just done through storytelling or building communities of transformation. That was done through the hard work of training young people in organizing, in electoral strategies, in telling our stories, and in leading campaigns and building a base of people. And always ensuring that that base, those members were the ones in the front lines, leading and developing strategies. So for our organizations and for funders, when we think about what are the lessons in this story that I shared with you all, is that the leadership of young people is critical for us to be able to reach a vision of justice in this country. We need young people to be able to lead, and you're seeing that from climate change to racial justice to the Me Too movement. The second thing is that centering young people means that they are also the ones holding staff roles. They're the ones that are writing our press releases. They're the ones that are driving our community meetings and organizing. And the conditions to do that require resources to support training, staffing, and infrastructure that will empower young people to do that. So I am a product of youth organizing. I am a product of the immigrant youth movement and of the many resources and infrastructure building that all of you have been able to support over the last couple of years. So I'll just leave you with imagining the power that we can build together and the change that we can achieve together. And if we continue to generate thousands and millions of young leaders that are going to be transforming our localities, building organizations, running for office, and also running the country.
Thank you so much, Cristina. Thank you. You did an amazing job in a very short period of time of telling the arc of a really powerful organization. Luis, we're going to kick it to you to hear some of your story and your experience.
Yeah, thank you. It's an honor to be here. You know, I consider myself a FCYO baby. You know, back in 2000, 2001, I'm not sure what year exactly, we received our first grant when I was executive director of Inner City Struggle. And, you know, and back then I was a volunteer ED, executive director, and a full-time high school teacher. And I think, you know, I think of the work that I do now today, you know, as executive director of Power California, we're a statewide alliance of almost close to 30 organizations. We're proud to say that, you know, we supported, you know, folks at Oakland's Kid First and supporting their work and helping pass, you know, Vote at 16 and really, you know, working collaboratively with them and in many ways to build their capacity to build civic engagement. And it just shows the reason I do this work in many ways is, and Ixchel and her story, I just think of my own journey in this work, right? You know, I came of age in Southern California, in Los Angeles in particular, right? But in Southern California, you know, it's hard to see it now, but, you know, Southern California was, in the time I grew up, one of the most conservative parts of the country, right? It produced Richard Nixon, it produced Ronald Reagan, it exported all the racist 21st century anti-immigrant criminal justice, all this new stuff that has become part of the stuff that we're fighting to now. You know, the laboratory of it was in Southern California. And, you know, and that's the California I grew up in, right? And in the same time, Southern California was also home of Hollywood. You know, it was a place that would export, you know, narratives of who we were and how we were, right? And in particular, those narratives that they would be exporting were narratives of Charles from East LA, of gangbangers from South LA, right? Bloods and Crips. And, you know, and those are narratives that, you know, me myself, I believed in, right? I believed in that narrative. I felt that, you know, when people got in trouble in my neighborhood or my own family, something happened to them, is they deserved it, right? and it was really, in the mid 1990s, coming of age, when I saw my city burn down, right? I was a senior in high school. I was 17 years old, and my whole city burned down. I couldn't go to school for 3 to 4 weeks, and I saw, hundreds of thousands of folks get arrested, primarily for trying to survive. I saw, Rodney King's murder on TV every day and every night, as did the whole nation. Beating, as did everyone in the whole nation, right? And that began to change in me, like, is this something we deserve, right? And that kind of coalesced with my closest cousin getting locked up for essentially a street fight, and he actually spent the next 10 to 15 years from juvie to adult prison, right? And it really changed, it really impacted me in a way, right? Because I began to see that not only were my friends and my family, and even my my dad and my uncles were being criminalized, not only because of their immigration status, but also because they were brown, right? And that really impacted what I wanted to do, right? And that's where, like, I think the full circle of Ixchel's story is that, there's that one moment that once you learn about it, is not only do you get involved, but you kind of choose a pathway for social change for the rest of your life. As Ixchel has become involved in this work and to vote, change vote at 16, other fights have been happening in Oakland around, eliminating the school police. I think part of that is that journey just changes you, right? And that you just want to see a better world. And I think for me, as I think about, now hearkening back when I love seeing the video, right? Seeing images of Vera and Melody, right? And I still remember, our first site visit from them, right? When we got our first grant in 2000, right? For $10,000, right? And I thought it was like the most money in the world at that moment, right? But I still remember who was in that room, right? And this is really, for me, the power of what youth organizing is, right? It's a long game, right? It's not only the fights we're seeing right now that young people are leading in the short term, and from immigration to climate justice to fund the police and other issues, but it's also the investments we make. That $10,000 had a ripple effect that cannot be quantified, right? So in that room for that site visit was a set of 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, right? One of them is the chief of staff to the school board member who actually led the effort to defund the school police department and LUSD, right? Actually eliminating the size of the Atlanta police department or the Oakland police department together, right? In that room was the chief of staff, another 16-year-old, the political director for FCYO 99, right? Who played a historic role in this past election in Los Angeles County, where we passed a historic measure called Measure J, which was around ending criminalization and using money from probation and county sheriffs to invest in housing and supporting folks coming out of jail, to supporting the whole mechanism we need to fund and really support families, right, who have been impacted by generations of criminal injustice, right? And also, led the effort for Imagine PAC, which was essentially a criminal justice PAC to support these measures in Los Angeles that actually led to the electing of a progressive DA, progressive county board of supervisors, right? And so that for me is incredible, right? Is that what investment in young people could look like, right? And for me, the long game is so critical because I think what we need to be thinking about is, I even think of my own journey, right? I never would have thought, even in my own journey now, that, back then when we were trying to fight to control our schools and fight for reforms, that 20 years later, in a place that passed 3 strikes you're out in LA County by almost 70% of the vote, that we would actually be funding the school police department in Los Angeles Unified, right? That we'd be passing a measure like Measure J, right? that that I would be now the chair of the redistricting commission for Los Angeles Unified School District, right? And helping shape the map for the next 10 years, right? And I think part of that is just the investment that youth organizing made in me as a young leader. They rolled the dice, right? I still remember in that meeting, Vera asking me, "Hey, I don't understand your budget. Did you make a mistake?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I made a mistake." And the reason I said that is because I didn't even know how to do a budget, right? But they still rolled the dice. They gave us our first grant, and then that led to another grant, and that led to investments from groups like Hazen Foundation, who are on this call, and the Liberty Hill Foundation, right? That really helped us build an organization in East Los Angeles that now is an anchor in Los Angeles, continues to do amazing work as Interstate Struggle, and really served as a launching point for what is now Power California, because a lot of folks who we worked with in Los Angeles that were doing amazing work at our respective organizations, at Interstate Struggle or sister organizations like Community Coalition, right, have helped build Power California, along with 20 other organizations across the state. And I think for me, the most important part of this journey has been when you invest in young people, you invest in infrastructure, you could actually transform first a city or a region of that city, like East Los Angeles, and then eventually Los Angeles, and then eventually the county, and eventually the state, right? Because that investment in leaders, not only like me, but a whole set of folks that are millennials and now Generation Z, are really leading the way and thinking differently on the world that we want to live in, and the United States we want to live in, or the state we want to live in. Because I think the beauty of youth organizing is, one, is they're not wedded to old concepts that limit us and get older. They're not connected to the patronage systems of political parties, or limited by like what can't happen. I harken back to even our own vision of what we were trying to do at Interstate Struggle in those early days. Is we had no power at that moment, right? But we thought that we could transform, everything from criminal justice system to educational system to even issues of housing, right? And I still remember we didn't even know when school board meetings were happening when we first started, right? And so I think part of that is like that work just shows what is possible, the robust infrastructure that could be built. At the end of the day, it's investing in young people, and the story of really California and the story of a place like Los Angeles is that people were invested at a young age, right? And they got involved in youth organizing, right? In organizations that are 20 years old, like Californians for Justice or Interstate Struggle or Community Coalition, right? Or Youth Justice Coalition, or new organizations that have emerged in the last 5-10 years in the Central Valley and Orange County, right? But at the end of the day, that investment has led to most of the most transformative change that we're seeing across the country and in our state. And I think that's what you need to look at, is that we think of the long game as funders, as a field, right? Because when we think about that, it creates the opportunity to really think about taking advantage of these moments. Claiborne Carson, who has written a lot around the history of the formation of SNCC, I remember him telling us that the amount of organizers that are involved at any moment in history is very similar. Like it's your ability to shape and be ready for those moments like these, right? Be able to take advantage of going from incremental change, right, to really doing some massive change like we're seeing, and the opportunity to think differently in these moments of crisis and opportunity, right? These are very difficult moments that are impacting our families and communities like never before. But at the same time, it allows us to think differently about how our cities, how our states, and how our country should be moving in a different direction, right? I kind of juxtapose I do a lot of electoral work now. I juxtapose the Tuesday and Wednesday of last week, right? On one end, we saw, led by mostly Black women in Georgia, the opportunity, and out of that emerged probably the election of not only of a new Senate, more importantly, actually two of the most progressive senators who will actually go to the Senate will be coming out of Georgia, right? That can have been said, 3 years ago, right? But it took the visionary leadership of folks to do that work, right? And on the next day, you saw what our fight is against, right? And it was difficult to see. It was difficult to imagine that, that is possible in our country, but we know full well that is part of our DNA, our country. I know that fully well because a lot of the 21st century white supremacist violence actually has roots in California and is funded by California, right? The Minutemen, everything to a lot of those groups, those newer roots come out of the West Coast, right? And California. So I know full well what is possible and what these folks have at their heart. But I know that in moments in our history, when people of color make progress and we're beginning to win, there's always a backlash, right? And I think in this moment, it's really the role of young people and youth organizers to really shape, direction of this country. They always have, I believe, and they're the ones who will lead us in the direction that we need to go, right? And I look at all the young people who are doing amazing work across this country and in my own state, and I think I'm proud to be part of this work. I'm proud to have, benefited from the investments of this movement. But more importantly, the thing that makes me most proud is when this new generation of young people, like Ixchel that just spoke, continues to organize, continues to challenge us to think differently, continues to push on us as they should, right? Because, as older organizers, our job is not to be gatekeepers. Our job is to open up the gates and make sure that they lead us in a direction that's more transformative and gives us the ability to create the world that we want.
Thank you, Luis. We know we've been privileged to hear the rich story of all that has transpired in California over the years with some of our visits and cohorts there. So thank you for putting such beautiful detail to that history. James, we'd love to hear a little bit from you. And then we'll come back for, we're running a little bit behind on time, but we'll come back for a discussion amongst all of us.
Thanks, Monica. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be in virtual space with you all. I am really humbled to be a part of this conversation with so much around youth organizing that has happened before my time. I actually am someone who came out of a city or got politicized without a youth organization around. I was a college student. I was a sophomore in undergrad when Trayvon Martin happened, and I was trying to figure out what was happening, what was like my actual purpose in life, sort of the usual kind of questions that an undergraduate would struggle with. But I tried to get as politically involved as possible locally, whatever that meant, right? Like join, city government internships, go to community meetings. And then after the tragedy of Mike Brown happened and the Ferguson uprising happened at the exact same time, I was graduating from undergraduate from college at the University of Buffalo. And through that time, I had made the decision that I don't actually know where I'm going to be going after this, but I do want to sort of commit my life to movement, whatever that meant to me at that time. And what was interesting to me is I got sucked into activist collectives where we did direct action, particularly around issues of police murders that were happening both nationally and locally. And the only sort of, I guess, nonprofit or NGO organizing groups were faith-based organizing. There was a faith-based organizing group that had mostly a membership of, 45 to 75-year-olds, and an environmental justice organization where the priority membership was elderly Irish working class people who live in like a working class neighborhood of South Buffalo. And that was the only place outside of the activist collectives we organized to go. And that was the place that sort of trained me up. I was sort of very used to being the youngest person in the room and trying to kind of figure things out in earnest. And part of the work that happened was, I was swept up in this movement where we were able to actually win things around civilian review boards, but it didn't have any teeth. we sort of won sort of broad reforms around ways mental health was actually utilized with first responders, but there wasn't actually a real way of sort of implementation. And I sort of kind of felt a period of disillusionment when defund, we're at a point now where defund is a mainstream conversation, but a lot of the things that I felt passionate about, that I felt like I won when I first got politicized, actually didn't necessarily amount to all the things that are coming up against us. And while that was happening, I happened to fall into working at FCYO, and I was very excited to be a part of an organization that also had its own history of being an organization in Miami that made the school to prison pipeline an actual thing, where if you talk to people in Miami, this is what was told to me, 10 years ago, you go to a meeting, people said the school to prison pipeline doesn't actually exist, or you're viewed as radicals, to now it being sort of a household talking point. And an organization that I respected nationally because they were able to win restorative justice in schools, and being a part of the wave of youth groups that really helped usher in and try to combat the zero tolerance policies that we saw in school today. And someone who came into the organization, I was immediately excited to kind of help think about the organization won restorative justice in schools. How can we actually make sure that it's implemented with fidelity? Same thing, an organization that we helped win comprehensive sex ed in schools. How can we organize to make sure it's implemented to fidelity? And similar to what I experienced in Buffalo, New York, we got iced out of many of the decision-making processes around that implementation, where we had the ability to mobilize, we had the ability to have rousing speeches, young people turning up. But when it came down to having those closed door meetings where the details really got hashed out, there was no way we were getting access to that. And I called as someone who's a newbie, I was like, let me just call other youth organizing groups to kind of figure out, like, am I bugging? Am I just failing terribly? What are you all doing? I know you want some things. How are you dealing with it? And what I saw in the conversations was they were saying the same thing. We won these particular campaign demands, but we didn't have the juice to kind of really win implementation. And when it was at that moment that it wasn't about the sort of shortcomings of the individual organization of FCYO, but it was actually telling a story. And at that point, after those conversations, I realized this was actually a trend that was happening within the youth organizing movement. And seeing the same dynamics about how members relate to paid staff, how they get involved in campaigns, it was also very similar to my time in a faith-based organization that had a majority membership of elderly folks. And what kind of came up for me in this moment as we're watching the wave of white supremacists on the rise, as we're seeing all these crises come up for us, it made it clear for me that the dynamics that we see in so-called adult organizing are not too fundamentally different from what you see in youth organizing. Sure, there are some specific differences. Maybe some member has a curfew, maybe another member doesn't. But generally what we saw happening in movement, or what we saw happening in youth organizing as a sector, actually told a story and gave us a glimpse what is happening in our social movements more broadly. And I think one of the things that I kind of want to offer as we think about the stage moving forward for youth organizing is that we need to think about youth organizing in the context of social movement and not just in the individual sector. Sure, there might be some funders, there might be some particular organizations that think about youth organizing as its own particular kind of corner. But if we, as people who are committed and have been committed for the past 20 years and longer in what youth organizing can be and the potential it has to helping movements, if we only view youth organizing as one particular sector that is not actually similar to all the other sectors of social movements, we're actually reifying this belief that youth organizing is not a serious thing to consider to invest in helping build out social movements. And the last thing that I would say is I'm very happy that I saw this sort of video that talks about where things were 20 years ago, because it also underscores that we are in a natural trajectory of youth organizing as a sector and our movements beginning to mature in a new sort of level. And with the maturation of that comes with a new need to be intentional about certain things. And some of the things that we usually did as our bread and butter 5-10 years ago may not be particularly relevant in this new phase of struggle. And the way I think about it, right, is, you know, every single professional sports, whether it's the NBA, whether it's the NFL, they invest a significant amount in farm teams. Those farm teams pay attention to, invest in a significant amount of recruiters of college teams, right, of all tiers. Those college teams have recruiters, have coaches, have trainers, have specialists in preparing and recruiting high schoolers, AAU programs from different backgrounds of the U.S., right? And I think what we need to think about in this moment is youth organizing is not the only sector that is struggling around implementation that needs to level up, but that we're actually in a moment in our social movements. The outcomes of the most recent Democratic primary highlight that our progressive wings are still growing, but that we don't actually have the numbers of people that we actually need to create change. We don't have the strong community-based organizations. We don't have enough of those to actually move the agenda that we need to do. And that what we need to do to move in that direction is to actually think about investing in the concrete fundamentals, and fundamentals that aren't just about our own individual project. And the beauty of youth organizing is that it ensures that wherever a young person goes from our organization, if we really develop in the fundamentals of how to organize, how to build organizations, and the importance of uniting poor and working class communities, then whenever they go, whether it's to college, whether it's to a job somewhere, they at least have the leadership skills ingrained to help us build organizations in the future that we need, but don't currently exist yet.
Thank you, James. I appreciate all the insight that you also shared. You know, part of the beauty of having the three of you together is that we get a really amazing snapshot of both like local, regional, and national organizing over the span of like the last 20 years. So I'm just wondering, you know, you all were able to sit and listen to each other speak. Like, what were there any aha moments or sparks that you connected with, or were like, yes, 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 that? Like, what were you hearing from each other that like helped you like kind of got your thinking going? Anybody want to jump in?
I know I could just kind of briefly go in with what Luis was sharing, and you know, some of the basics around like not necessarily knowing how to manage a budget, not necessarily knowing when the next school board meeting is. Just sort of, it kind of resonates with just like so much of members when they first enter the organization. Even paid staff is just trying to kind of build the plane as we kind of go. And you know, that's the growing pains, I think, kind of have a lot of commonalities across organizations. And I think I've bonded the most with other people from organizations around how much of our challenges developmentally and organizationally are just so similar.
I think the one thing that for me emerged that I think is so important to lift up is the leadership development and the training that all of us mentioned, either experiences that we had ourselves in that training and development, or how we worked in campaigns that like train and develop other folks within our organizations or campaigns that we share in our stories. And often the leadership development work and that pipeline or that through line that we take young people through is invisibilized and not recognized. And it's so much hard work that I really, for me, is really important to lift up, that we're organizing, we're organizing people as whole people
across our
Exactly.
platforms are looking and
That's right.
reflecting on.
Can we
so that we're all holding
ask folks to mute if you're not speaking? Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, which is just like each of us had our own story of why we got engaged, right? Which just shows like, the personal is political, right? Which for me, I think is like why it's so important to help young people make meaning of their struggle, right? We come in with a lot of trauma into this work, and that if we do it right, we young people engage in this work as a lifetime project, right? But more importantly, as we kind of level up, in the words that Monica mentioned earlier, is that how do we kind of figure out a mechanism so that we actually help, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of young people across this country make meaning of these moments, right? Because, if you're looking at, SB 1070 or Prop 187 California or the Black Lives Matter moment, and all the state violence that's been happening for generations, but now it's on video, is these are moments that young people will make meaning of and will really shape how they see the world around them. So I think that's, really the thing about it, because that's what we do this work today. That's what I heard, right? And so I think part of it, that's the power of our stories.
And Cristina, I heard you say, I mean, we heard Ixchel talk about social power versus moral power. I heard, Cristina, you mention some of the, the importance of like owning your story, but some of the limitations. I know, James, we've talked extensively about this. And so wondering like, what is the balance between, owning our stories, our narratives, and moving like structural change, like shifting conditions?
Yeah, I mean, I think, to that point in the work that we've done within the immigrant youth movement, there was a lot of very courageous act of storytelling and of coming out as undocumented, as unafraid, and as our chant goes, like queer and unashamed. And the act of coming out is actually, a very courageous act. It's an act of self-determination that really helped us build movement, build community, and make meaning, as Liz is saying, but also to build narratives that disrupted the very much conversation around immigrants that has been one around criminalizing not belonging and immigrants being criminals. So I think, and one that has stripped people from their humanity too. So I think that act of reclaiming our humanity is critical, because that's the personal transformation and the community transformation to be able to engage into organizing. But telling our story, it's not the power. It doesn't build the power that we need to be able to change dynamics and to win policy change. And, as I was sharing, our stories could get us to one place: changing hearts and minds, creating the moral imperative, changing the conversation, forcing reporters to stop using words like illegal to refer to our communities. And those were amazing changes. However, that did not create the power that we needed to have to push Congress and to push the President of the United States to create the policies and to pass the policies that we were demanding for change. There were many young people, undocumented and documented, that over time spoke to many members of Congress, to Obama himself. And sharing those stories did not push them to enact the policies that we needed to see. And having meetings with a lot of these elected officials and folks that hold power in institutions of government, it's not power. Having access to those meetings is not power. And that became very clear for our movement, which is why we started to engage in getting folks to vote in elections. We engage in developing a C4 infrastructure and a PAC infrastructure to hold elected officials accountable, to push candidates to commit to our demands, to use our power base to speak for the issues, to define the issues of electoral campaigns, and then once folks get elected, to hold them accountable. So it really wasn't until the electoral threat was clear, both for some Democrats and some Republicans, that we were able to shake some change at the White House under the Obama administration, because Obama was in a moment of re-election. And he didn't want Republicans to be able to take credit for creating any change. And our voice and our organizing became so influential that he knew we could impact the way that voters were going to interact and or identify with the Obama re-election efforts. And that really created the breakthrough for something like DACA to happen. So I'm not saying that stories aren't important. They're important. They're part of our work. They need to be part of our work, but it needs to be more than that. And the power building is what is so critical to get us to that change.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Thank you, Cristina. James, I'm wondering a twofold, your thoughts on that same question, and then to fold in vision moving forward.
Yeah, I appreciate the distinction Cristina is also making too. I think what comes up for me is, there is a way of training people to talk about their story that is like sexy for media, that, is great for, popularizing it, being on mainstream media with like certain sound bites. And then there's also a way of people practicing their stories, or at least being clear about what their story is, as a way to build relationships with other people who are like themselves, or other people who grow up in the same communities as them. And I think sometimes folks are incentivized to tell a perfect story that is conducive for media, but have a hard time in the practice, right, of relating to their own folks as they get involved in the organization. And I think that's a normal challenge. But when I think about the piece around storytelling, it's a question around how are our organizations helping people practice the ability to build an emotional intelligence about who you actually are, but also doing it in a way where you can practice building relationships who are like you, and also building relationships with people who are not like you. I think that stuff is a little bit more important than, what sounds the best around the press release, and recognizing both of those things are needed. But I think in this current phase where we are politically, we should double down on the investment in how people relate to one another, more so than just what the media is sort of incentivizing.
And so I see we have Luis back. Luis, maybe we're continuing to run. So maybe 1 minute or 30 seconds from each of you on like vision forward. Luis, we're sorry we lost you. We saw it, but like, give us your 30-minute, like, what is your vision for 30-second? What is your vision for the field moving forward?
I mean, it's to ensure that we continue to support it, grow it. That we invest, hundreds of millions of dollars to the field, right? And ensure that we're continuing to build the pipeline necessary so that in the day, it's not only about, pushing folks in the way, in the same way that Cristina mentioned right now, it's not only about pushing folks forward, but it's also about making sure that we build a governance strategy that ensures that our folks are generally changing the rules of the game, but also have the power to determine the future of this country, right? And so for me, demographics is not destiny. For me, it's about, you got to bend that arc, right? And one of the folks in our state, Professor Manuel Pastor says, the arc bends towards justice, but someone's got to fucking bend it, right? And so I think part of that work is making sure that we invest in organizations doing this work, and also be much more willing to invest in stuff that you may not feel comfortable in, right? And I think about the defund the police movement has kind of really grown this past year, right? It's helping us reimagine everything, especially, and it's not as it's harder to fund, right? But we have to challenge ourselves as philanthropy if we really want to transform the systems that have negatively impacted young people for generations.
Thanks. Cristina, your 30-second like vision forward.
I really think to the point that Luis raised that the numbers are not destiny. I think that we really need to sit with what we're up against and have a sober analysis that what happened in Washington, D.C. recently is just another manifestation of, what's at the root. White supremacy and systematic racism. And in order for us to be able to do that in some way, when we look at the conservative movements and at the alt-right, they've not only created movements, but they've actually created pipelines and paths for them to actually become those in government. And we have gone through a period of time where in front of the world, white supremacists move from being grassroots activists and having organized groups locally to running our government, to running the Department of Homeland Security, to have advisor roles in the White House. And this is how you end up having folks like Stephen Miller designing horrible and very evil policies around immigrants and refugees, for example. But that's one example of the many that we can offer, and that I think what happened in the Capitol in DC creates urgency for. So to me, when I think about the future, I think about how our movements led by young people, and in your video, someone said beautifully, young people are the vanguard of social justice movements, and how our movements, quite frankly, take over, how our movements get to lead institutions, get to be in governance power, so that we are able to get at the root of what we're going through and change policy and get to a vision of a multiracial democracy that works for all people.
James?
Yeah, I think in the immediate sort of decade or so, I think we're going to see a continuation of new organizations, regardless of age, get created, and people struggling, learning from the first time how to do the fundamentals. And I think what my vision for youth organizing could be is we are part of the beginning of an infrastructure that ensures that 10, 20 years from now, organizations are actually on the cutting edge. And in this current moment, the ability to be on the cutting edge is, can you actually do the fundamentals of community-based building appropriately? And I think we have a role to play where we can really invest to be the so-called, division one of anyone who comes out of our institutions can build working class organizations with the fundamentals ingrained in building power.
Okay. Thank you all. It's been a beautiful conversation. We're so grateful for your leadership and our work. And we're also grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time with you today. Eric, I'll take it to you, and hopefully we can still have some time for a little bit of discussion in small groups.
Yeah, all right. Thank you all so much. That was great. So we want to get people, you all been sitting and listening, and if you're not stimulated by this conversation yet, I don't know what we'll get you involved. But we really want to hear some of your thoughts. So we're going to break us up into small groups until 5 of. So we'll have just under 15 minutes in the small groups. We have FCYO staff members and board members who are going to be in each group to be able to facilitate. And quick note to the facilitators, given the time, I wouldn't, let's not spend time having people fill things out on Post-it notes ahead of time, but just jump right into the conversation, right? And there's really 2 questions, which I think we can have, an integrated conversation about what do you think have been the most important accomplishments of the last 20 years? And then let's really move to what do you think is needed right now for young people to play the roles in this moment? So with that, we're going to split us into small groups. I encourage you to stick around and engage and talk with each other, because this is an important part of this conversation. So we want you to join the conversation and talk with us. So with that, we will send us into small groups until 5 of, and then we'll come back and close.
Oh, they're taking us out. Goodbye.
Welcome back, everybody. I know that was brief, but I hope you got to start at least having a little conversation, engaging with each other. If there are key ideas or insights that came out of that for you, key lessons that you heard, things that really resonated from the panel or that sparked your mind, and you want to drop them in the chat right now, we'd love to hear, you know, what really stood out to you about all of our conversations today. What did you learn? What did you find most interesting? You know, what are you leaving with about what's critical in this moment about supporting the role of young people in social movements? So if you have any last thoughts on that, please feel free to drop them in the chat. Again, we just want to really thank everybody for being here for us at FCYO. We're excited to be heading in past these first 2 decades and, you know, but really feeling like now more than ever, it's critical to be supporting the role of young people in social movements. This is such an important moment in our history where we are facing some serious crises. And if we are going to make it out of it, it's clear to me that it is the leadership of young people of color, working class young people, queer and trans young people, young women that are going to lead us out of this crisis. But that if we're going to do it, we're all going to have to level up. Youth organizing is going to have to reach a new level of power, and funders are going to have to step up to figure out how to get those resources there. So we're excited at FCYO to be partnering with all of you in this next time period to figure out how to make that happen. And I will turn it to Monica to close us out.
It's helpful if you unmute yourself. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We appreciate you spending a couple of hours with us talking about the important role of young people. FCYO is excited to continue to bring funders and youth organizers together in the next year, in our next decade, in our next 20 years to ensure that we're supporting young people and playing a vital role in building the movements we need. Please stay in touch. We actually have way more exciting opportunities to connect with us and with other folks in the movement over the next few months. We'll be releasing a new field scan. We'll have new programs kicking off. We'll launch a new funder learning community. So please continue to stay in contact with us. And as always, like outreach to us for anything you might need or any support. Thank you all. See you next time.
Thank you all so much.
What is
Now we had